A single glance from across the crowded airport lounge. That's all it took for Marco Reyes to recognize the familiar face, the same one that had coldly rejected his application years ago. Today, dressed in his janitor's uniform, he pushed his cleaning cart quietly past the executive. Little did anyone know that beneath those calloused hands lay a gift that would soon silence every whisper of doubt. Before we dive into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from. The fluorescent lights of Westridge Academy's hallways buzzed overhead as Marco Reyes guided his mop across the polished floor. His movements were methodical, almost musical in their rhythm. Students rushed past, their expensive shoes squeaking against the wet surface. None of them bothered to look at the middle-aged man in grey overalls. "Watch it," a lanky teenager shouted as he nearly collided with Marco's cleaning cart. "Sorry, sir," Marco replied softly, his accent thick but his English precise. Principal. Hargrove emerged from his office, flanked by a tall man in an impeccable charcoal suit. Dr. Julian Fletcher, the new head of the music department. Marco recognized him immediately from the articles he'd read online, a renowned pianist who'd left the concert stage to shape the next generation of exceptional talents. "We've completely renovated the music wing," Hargrove boasted. "State-of-the-art. Practice rooms, concert-quality pianos." Fletcher nodded approvingly. "Excellence requires the proper environment." Marco kept his head down as they passed, but couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "The Winter Showcase is our most prestigious event," Hargrove continued. "Talent scouts from Juilliard, Curtis, Peabody, they all attend." "I'm looking forward to elevating the standards," Fletcher replied. "My previous institution produced 3 Tchaikovsky competition finalists in 5 years. Marco's hand tightened around his mop handle. He remembered the rejection letter from that very institution, addressed to his daughter, Lucia. "While your technical abilities are commendable, we regret to inform you that your application lacks the artistic maturity we require." The sound of running footsteps interrupted his thoughts. "Dad," Lucia called out, her school uniform slightly rumpled, her dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. At 17, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made Marco's chest swell with pride. "Carino," he smiled, "why aren't you in class?" "Free period. I wanted to tell you I got the job. The coffee shop near school is hiring me for weekends." Marco frowned. "But your practice time..." "Dad, we need the money," she whispered. The showcase fee increased again this year. Before Marco could respond, Fletcher and Hargrove circled back, stopping directly in front of them. "Miss Reyes," Principal Hargrove said. "Dr. Fletcher, this is one of our scholarship students." Fletcher's eyes moved from Lucia to Marco, making the connection. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps discomfort. "Lucia plays piano," Hargrove added, almost apologetically. "How nice," Fletcher said, his tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "The school's community outreach program is commendable." Marco felt his daughter stiffen beside him. "Actually, sir," Lucia began, "I'm hoping to perform at the Winter Showcase." Fletcher's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The showcase features our most advanced students. Perhaps one of the spring recitals would be more appropriate for your level." Marco watched as his daughter's face fell, then quickly rearranged itself into a polite mask. "Of course, Dr. Fletcher, I understand." As they walked away, Marco heard Fletcher murmur to Hargrove, "The custodian's daughter. Really, Charles, we must maintain certain standards." Lucia waited until they were out of earshot before her composure cracked. "He didn't even ask to hear me play." Marco rested a hand on her shoulder. "His loss, Mija. You don't understand, Dad. Without the showcase, the scholarship committees won't even look at my applications." Marco understood perfectly. He'd been invisible his entire life, first as an immigrant, then as a service worker. Now his daughter was learning the same bitter lesson. "Then we find another way," he said firmly. "Always, there is another way." The high faculty lounge was empty when Marco entered to empty the trash bins. Empty except for the gleaming black grand piano in the corner, a recent donation from a wealthy parent, according to the gold plaque on its side. Marco glanced at his watch. His shift would end in 20 minutes. The building would be deserted. He finished his tasks efficiently, then returned to the lounge. After placing his floor cleaning in progress sign outside the door, he sat down at the piano bench. His rough hands hovered over the keys. It had been months since he'd played anything but their old upright at home, the one with the sticky D-flat and the pedal that squeaked. He closed his eyes and began to play. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the room. Marco's fingers moved with practiced precision, coaxing both thunder and whispers from the instrument. The music swelled around him, transporting him back to his conservatory days in Mexico City, before his father's illness, before the move north, before all the compromises and sacrifices. So absorbed was he in the music that he didn't notice the door opening. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Marco's hands froze mid-phrase. Dr. Fletcher stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of shock and indignation. "I'm sorry," Marco said, rising quickly from the bench. "I was just—" "You were just what?" "That instrument is worth more than you'll earn in a decade. It's not a toy for the cleaning staff." Marco's face burned with humiliation. "Yes, sir, it won't happen again." Fletcher watched him with narrow eyes as Marco gathered his cleaning supplies. "That was Rachmaninoff," Fletcher said suddenly. Marco paused. "Yes, the second concerto. You've had some training." It wasn't a question, but Marco answered anyway. "A long time ago." Fletcher seemed to struggle with something internally before his face hardened again. "Well, that's the faculty lounge. Piano. Staff facilities are in the basement." Marco nodded and left without another word, the shame of the encounter sitting like a stone in his stomach. The second incident occurred 2 weeks later in the main auditorium. Marco was replacing light bulbs in the fixtures along the back wall, while Dr. Fletcher conducted rehearsals for the showcase. A slender girl with copper hair sat at the piano, playing a Chopin nocturne. Her technique was flawless, but even to Marco's ear something was missing. "Better, Olivia," Fletcher said when she finished, "but still too academic. Chopin requires passion, not just precision." The girl nodded earnestly. "I'll work on it, Doctor." "Fletcher, who's next?" Fletcher consulted his clipboard. Benjamin with the list." A nervous-looking boy approached the piano, but before he could begin, there was a commotion at the auditorium entrance. Lucia burst through the doors, breathless and disheveled. "I'm so sorry I'm late, Dr. Fletcher," she called. "The bus broke down and—" "Ms. Reyes," Fletcher cut her off. "This is a closed rehearsal for showcase participants." "I know, but Mrs. Chen said I could observe since I'm her teaching assistant." Fletcher sighed. "Fine, sit quietly in the back, and please try not to disturb the actual performers." Lucia nodded quickly and made her way up the aisle, her face burning as she passed the other students. She spotted her father on the ladder and gave him a small, embarrassed wave. Benjamin's performance of Liszt's La Campanella was technically impressive but stiff with nerves. When he fumbled a particularly difficult passage, Fletcher stopped him. "Let's move on. We're running behind schedule." For the next hour, Marco watched as Fletcher critiqued each student with surgical precision. Some left the stage looking inspired, others seemed deflated. "That concludes today's rehearsals," Fletcher announced finally. "Remember, your final repertoire selections are due next week." As the students gathered their things, Fletcher noticed Lucia still sitting in the back row scribbling in a notebook. "Ms. Reyes," he called. "Since you're here, perhaps you'd like to play something for us?" The remaining students turned to look at Lucia, who froze like a deer in headlights. "Oh, I'm just here to observe." "I insist," Fletcher said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You've been watching your peers so attentively. Show us what you've learned." Marco's grip tightened on the ladder. He recognized the cruelty in Fletcher's voice, the public humiliation being orchestrated. Lucia hesitantly made her way to the piano. Marco could see her hands trembling as she sat down. "What will you play for us?" Fletcher asked. I've been working on Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata," she said softly. A few students exchanged glances. The Pathetique was notoriously difficult. "All 3 movements?" Fletcher asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just the first." "Proceed." Lucia took a deep breath and began to play. Her performance was solid, if cautious. Marco could hear both her talent and her nerves in every phrase. Fletcher let her play for about 2 minutes before raising his hand. "That's enough, thank you." Lucia stopped, her final notes hanging awkwardly. "In the air. Your left hand is underdeveloped," Fletcher said, "and you're rushing the adagio sections." "Yes, sir. You might consider something less ambitious for your recital. Perhaps a simpler Chopin waltz or a Mozart sonatina." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Several students snickered. "I'll work harder, Dr. Fletcher." "Work smarter, not harder, Ms. Reyes. Not everyone is cut out for the classics." Fletcher gathered his papers. "That's all for today." As the auditorium emptied, Marco descended the ladder, fighting the urge to confront Fletcher. Lucia remained seated at the piano, staring at the keys. "Don't listen to him, Mika," Marco said when they were alone. "But he's right, Dad. I'm not good enough." "That's not what he said. He said you need more practice." "It's what he meant." Lucia closed the piano lid gently. "And it doesn't matter anyway. Even if I improved overnight, he's already decided who'll perform at the showcase." Marco watched his daughter walk away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The familiar rage bubbled inside him, the same he'd felt every time a door had closed in their faces because of their name, their accent, their address. He approached the piano and lifted the lid. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before he pulled back. Not yet. The third humiliation came a month later at the parent-teacher reception. Marco wasn't supposed to attend. He was working as part of the catering staff, wearing a white shirt and black bow tie instead of his usual overalls. He moved through the crowded atrium with a tray of champagne flutes, invisible to the chattering parents and teachers. Lucia stood near the refreshment table with her friend Mindy, both girls hired to check coats for the evening. Dr. Fletcher held court near the grand piano that had been moved from the lounge for the occasion. He was demonstrating something to an admiring circle of parents, his fingers dancing across the keys in a brief but impressive display. "Magnificent," said a woman in an emerald cocktail dress. "We're so fortunate to have someone of your caliber teaching our children." Fletcher smiled modestly. "Music education is my passion. Identifying and nurturing true talent. There's nothing more rewarding." Marco edged closer, offering champagne to the group. "Will we hear some of the students perform tonight?" asked a father in a tailored suit. "I've selected a few of our showcase participants to play later," Fletcher replied. "A preview of the excellence Westridge is cultivating." "My Olivia has been practicing non-stop," said the emerald dress woman. "She's determined to impress the Juilliard Scout." "She's one of our most promising pianists," Fletcher assured her. A man in a navy blazer gestured toward Lucia. "What about the scholarship students? Do they participate in the showcase?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Fletcher cleared his throat. "We have an inclusive program at Westridge," he said carefully, "but the showcase is our premier event. The competition is quite rigorous." "Meaning?" the man pressed. "Meaning," Fletcher said, lowering his voice, "that certain students benefit more from our general music education than our advanced performance track. Not everyone has the background or resources for serious classical training." Marco's hand tightened around his serving tray. Across the room he could see that Lucia had overheard, her face flushing with shame. "Dad," she whispered as he passed her, "please don't say anything." "I won't, Mia," he promised. But something had shifted inside him, a switch flipping from resignation to resolve. Principal Hargrove tapped a spoon against his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished music faculty, who will now treat us to a brief performance." The parents applauded as Fletcher and two other teachers took their positions. Fletcher at the piano, Mrs. Chen with her violin, and Mr. Abernathy with his cello. They launched into a polished rendition of Schubert's piano trio in B-flat major. Marco watched from the periphery, his server's smile fixed in place. But inside, a plan was forming. When the performance concluded to enthusiastic applause, Hargrove spoke again. "And now, as Dr. Fletcher mentioned, a few of our exceptional students will preview their showcase pieces." Olivia played her Chopin Nocturne, more confident now. Benjamin had conquered his nerves for the list. Two other students performed short pieces with technical precision, if not profound musicality. "Thank you all," Hargrove said. "What exceptional talent we have at Westridge." "Indeed," Fletcher agreed, returning to the piano. Before we conclude, I'd like to demonstrate something about musical interpretation. He positioned his hands over the keys. This is the opening of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, one of the most demanding pieces in the repertoire. Marco froze. Fletcher played the famous opening chords, then stopped. Now many amateurs attempt this piece, Fletcher continued, but they miss its essential character. They play the notes. He demonstrated a technically correct but sterile phrase, but they miss the soul. Fletcher looked directly at Marco, a challenge in his eyes. True artistry requires more than mimicry. It requires education, culture, refinement. The message couldn't have been clearer. Marco set down his tray on a nearby table. "Excuse me," he said, stepping forward. "May I?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Fletcher's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. "I'm sorry? May I try?" Marco gestured toward the piano. Fletcher glanced at Hargrove, who looked mortified. "Mr. Reyes, this isn't appropriate," Hargrove began. "Let him try," said the man in the navy blazer, curiosity written across his face. Fletcher smirked. "By all means." He stood and gestured dramatically toward the piano. The crowd tittered as Marco approached, still in his server's uniform. Lucia grabbed his arm. "Dad, don't," she whispered. "They're just going to laugh at you." Marco patted her hand. "Some things are worth the risk, Mija." He sat down at the piano, adjusting the bench. The room had gone completely silent. He could feel every eye on him, sense the mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's concerto filled the atrium. But unlike Fletcher's demonstration, Marco's performance was transformed by decades of unspoken emotion. Each note carried the weight of his journey, the dreams deferred, the daily indignities, the fierce love that had kept him going. His rough, work-worn hands moved across the keys with astonishing dexterity and sensitivity. The famous melody unfolded, with a haunting, vulnerable quality that made it sound newly composed. As Marco progressed to the more technically demanding passages, his playing became increasingly virtuosic. His left hand commanded the thunderous bass lines, while his right wove complex harmonies and delicate filigree above. Yet even at its most impressive, his performance never became merely showy. Each technical feat served the music's emotional narrative. Marco lost himself in the performance, forgetting the audience, forgetting Fletcher, forgetting everything except the conversation between composer and interpreter. When the music required power, he summoned it effortlessly. When it called for tenderness, his touch became feather-light, drawing colors from the instrument that seemed impossible. He brought the excerpt to a natural conclusion, the final notes hanging in the air like a question. Only then did he open his eyes. The room remained absolutely silent. Principal Hargrove stood frozen, champagne glass halfway to his lips. Mrs. Chen, the violin teacher, had tears streaming down her face, and Fletcher had gone pale, his expression unreadable. Then Lucia began to clap, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. One by one, others joined in until the entire room erupted in applause. "Extraordinary," breathed the woman in the emerald dress. "Who is he?" someone whispered loudly. "The janitor," came the astonished reply. Marco stood, smoothing his server's jacket, and gave a small, dignified bow. Fletcher's face had flushed deep. "Where did you study?" he demanded, raising his voice to be heard over the continued applause. "Mexico City Conservatory," Marco replied quietly. "I was preparing for my debut with the National Symphony when my father fell ill." Fletcher's eyes widened in recognition. "You're Marco Reyes, the scholarship finalist who disappeared." Marco nodded once. Life had other plans for me. The crowd had fallen silent again, captivated by this unexpected revelation. "Why didn't you say something?" Fletcher asked, genuine bewilderment in his voice. "Would you have listened?" Marco replied simply. Fletcher had no answer. Principal Hargrove stepped forward, his professional instincts kicking in. "Mr. Reyes, that was remarkable, truly remarkable." The man in the navy blazer approached Marco, hand extended. "James Sullivan, Manhattan Conservatory of Music. We should talk." Lucia pushed through the crowd to her father's side, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Dad," she whispered, You never told me. Some things are hard to talk about, Mika. He squeezed her hand. But perhaps it's time I started teaching again. Fletcher cleared his throat awkwardly. Mr. Reyes, I owe you an apology, and your daughter as well. Marco met his gaze steadily. My daughter is the real musician in the family, Dr. Fletcher. She just needs someone to truly listen. The winter showcase took place 2 months later. Marco sat in the front row, no longer wearing his janitor's uniform or server's attire, but a simple, dark suit. The program listed him as guest artist and faculty advisor, a position created specifically for him after his impromptu performance. 3 evenings a week, he now taught advanced master classes, his schedule arranged around his daytime custodial duties, which he'd insisted on keeping. You have a gift for bringing out authentic expression in these young musicians, Hargrove had told him. We need that at Westridge. Fletcher had been stiffly professional in the weeks that followed, his initial resentment gradually giving way to reluctant respect. He'd even begun consulting Marco on interpretive questions, tentatively at first, then with increasing openness. Lucia was the final performer of the evening. As she walked onto the stage, her posture was different, confident but not arrogant, focused but not tense. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench and began to play the complete first movement of Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata. Her performance was revelatory. The technical issues Fletcher had criticized were gone, replaced by assured command of the instrument. But more importantly, she played with a maturity and emotional intelligence that silenced the room. Marco watched his daughter, tears stinging his eyes. Her music told their story, the struggles and sacrifices, yes, but also the unwavering hope, the quiet dignity, the refusal to be diminished. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Marco saw Fletcher stand, genuine admiration on his face. Lucia took her bow, then sought out her father's eyes, her smile radiant with joy. Later, at the reception, Fletcher approached them. Remarkable progress, he told Lucia. The Juilliard representative was very impressed. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. Fletcher hesitated, then turned to Marco. I've been thinking about what you said, about truly listening. I'd like to establish a scholarship program for talented students who lack resources. Would you consider helping to develop it? Marco studied the man's face, finding sincerity where arrogance had once resided. I would be honored, he said. As Fletcher moved away, Lucia turned to her father. I still can't believe everything that's happened. Marco smiled. I always told you there was another way, Mija. But why didn't you ever tell me about your past, about how good you really are? Because I wanted you to find your own voice, not echo mine. He touched her cheek gently. And because for a long time, I believed that part of my life was over. And now? Marco looked around the room, at the students who now greeted him with respect, at Fletcher, who was learning to see beyond appearances, at the piano waiting for someone to bring it to life. Now, he said, I remember that music isn't just about the performance. It's about having something to say, and the courage to say it, no matter who's listening. 6 months later, Marco stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, watching Lucia walk onto the stage for her student showcase performance. In the audience sat James Sullivan, who had arranged for both Lucia's conservatory scholarship and Marco's position as adjunct faculty. Marco still worked part-time at Westridge, both as custodian and teacher. He'd declined offers to return to performing professionally. My hands remember, he'd explained to Sullivan, but my heart has found a different purpose. That purpose was now playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 with such emotional intelligence that the sophisticated New York audience was spellbound. Marco watched his daughter, marveling at how fully she inhabited the music, how confidently she claimed her place on that illustrious stage. Backstage, after thunderous applause, Lucia fell into her father's arms. They listened, Dad, she whispered. They really listened. Marco held her tight, his voice thick with emotion. Because you made them hear you, Mija. Not through force or flash, but through truth. Over her shoulder, he caught sight of Dr. Fletcher, who had traveled from Arizona for the event. The man nodded respectfully, an acknowledgement of how wrong his judgments had been. Marco nodded back, without resentment. He had long since realized that the greatest victory wasn't proving Fletcher wrong. It was showing his daughter that worth wasn't determined by others' perceptions. As they walked together toward the reception, Lucia asked, "Do you ever regret it, the career you might have had?" Marco thought carefully before answering, "I regret some choices that weren't really choices at all, but I don't regret where those paths led me." He squeezed her hand. "Some talents stay hidden not because they're unworthy of being seen, but because they're waiting for the right moment to matter. The true measure of a person lies not in the acclaim they receive, but in the dignity with which they face dismissal. Talent may open doors, but character determines what happens in the rooms beyond. We are all, in our way, both the humble worker and the brilliant artist, containing multitudes that the world may never fully see. The question isn't whether we'll be underestimated, but what we'll do when we finally have the chance to be heard."